Welcome to today's masterclass. Apologies for the delay. My name is Marcel agribusiness progress lead at Invest in Africa, and I'll be hosting you in today's event. The theme of today is capacity building for agri-SMEs, food producers on food safety standards and regulation. Today we are honored to be hosting a award in today's section again, and sit down leading us in the discussion of the day. Our speaker today is Mr. Apollo Awon, who is the chairman of Fresh Produce Exporters Association of Kenya. In terms of experience and competence, Mr. Apollo holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Agriculture Economics from Egerton University, with additional experience, qualification on agrochemical standard inspection schemes. He has over 25 years experience in agriculture in the private sector. At this point, I'm going to introduce Mr. Apollo to take us through the discussion of the day. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Mercy, for your very kind words. I never knew I was carrying that weight, but I'm really appreciative of that. And good morning to all participants. I am very glad to be sharing with you this morning on the aspects of food safety. And of course, this is a very I'm very passionate about issues of food safety, because that's who we are. We are all informed by what we eat. We are we are what we eat, and therefore, if what we eat is not safe, then we don't have a population. So it will be interesting for us now to look at it from the basic concepts and the principles of food safety prior to hitting the ground on issues of compliance and managing regulatory framework, because the understanding has to be built on where we are at as far as issues are concerned and what are the issues that we face, in order to then build up to the level where now we get into compliance. So with regard to this, it's definitely food is safe once there is certainty that there is no harm that will result from its consumption. We are basically, as a foundation, we need to ensure that food safety forms a very important part, that in any food business, the key aspect is that if I walk into any place that serves food, I am comfortable and I will be able to grasp it. Historically, there has been issues that are related to food scares, where there's foodborne illnesses that have resulted from consumption of contaminated food, or also other aspects that are related to harmful aspects within the foods. And this can be prevented with the proper food production, handling, and attention to good practices and hygiene. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of what food safety is about. Now, food safety is about the route it takes. It's about production, it's about handling, it's about storage and preparation. And within those key parameters that I've mentioned, therein lies the probable points of contaminations that could lead to infectious diseases and injuries, and also a risk to human health. And yet again, within that process, we need to have the food that is able to retain sufficient nutrients that will enhance a healthy diet. So building on that background, then what is food safety? What we want to understand, to address, is what is our understanding on food safety. If you ask a kindergarten child, if you ask a primary school kid, if you ask kids in high school or whatever, what is food safety? From the UN FAO understanding, food safety is the assurance that food will not cause harm to the consumer. So we have it's providing the assurance that it will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared and or eaten according to its intended use. There are various forms of usage in food and how it is packaged. So it becomes unsafe when it is exposed to contaminants. And what are the kind of contaminants that we're looking at? We have biological contaminants, germs in simple terms. We have chemical contaminants, which compose pesticides, lubricants, oils, and any other thing that would fall into the space of chemical. And then the physical agents in food. We have sometimes we find it some stones in rice, or you have some splinters of wood in food, or glass. Those are the kind of contaminants that you're looking at. So if you move on in terms of just going further by trying to look at food safety and quality within that space, usually as a result of people tend to confuse the food safety and food quality. That food safety and quality are the totality of the characteristics of the food products that bear on the ability to satisfy all legal, that is the regulatory framework, and the legislative framework, customer and consumer requirements. That's the totality of it. So there is within the quality aspect, you'll probably be looking at several attributes like how it is prepared, how it is the looks. But now within the safety aspect is now the overall protection of the consumer. And standards for food are developed by technical committees or by within it in order to give compositional requirements on the microbial and tolerance limits on contaminants, packaging, labeling, and the overall hygiene conditions in which food is presented. So food is considered safe once there is certainty that no harm will result from its consumption under the anticipated conditions of use. And we in Kenya here, we have experienced several cases of foodborne illnesses. We have, I think in 2019, there was a scare on heavy metal contamination in sugar. That is, they was calling mercury in sugar. There was aflatoxin scare in maize, aflatoxin poisoning. So foodborne illnesses are a major problem, not only in Kenya, but worldwide. And because of the enormous informal sector in the food industry, accounting to over 80% of supply to the domestic market, where hygiene controls are very rudimentary. And approximately 70% of all episodes of diarrhea are attributed to ingestion of contaminated food and water. And informal sector, especially in the developing world, informal sector comprises of SMEs and food vendors, which supply nearly 80% of the food to the domestic market, including meat and milk products under rudimentary hygiene controls. So if you could see the kind of the level of businesses that are handling food, then it is pretty much it's a very big process. So when trying to look at this in the space of the food supply chain, where we're looking at production from farm to fork, then food safety approach implies continuous responsibility for all the stakeholders all through the supply chain. From the farming aspect, where you're looking at agricultural production, within the agricultural production, what standards are applicable within that, which is here we are considering aspects of good agricultural practice. And then now through the processes of transport or handling, all the handling to the consumers, where now we start looking at their aspects of good distribution practices on issues of hygiene and all the other parameters that I've handled. And then there's the good manufacturing practices, and finally to the consumer, where again we have to consider good distribution practices. And within it is now looking at the risk measures. I'm looking at the various risk management measures through the entire chain on various systems which are recognized internationally, like hazard analysis and critical control point, which is HACCP. There is other parameters that I use, ISO 22000. There is the good global gap systems. There is, and many other farm assurance and manufacturing schemes. So those would be the key issues. And then now, why food safety? You know, there is increasing consumption of fresh produce, health conscious way, the consumption of fruits in our puddings, and this definitely means that if handled poorly, then there is increase in the number of produce associated with foodborne diseases and outbreaks globally. So produce associated outbreaks per year have more than doubled in most countries. And as we know, a variety of fruits and vegetables are implicated because our consumption now tends to be towards semi-cooked, raw to semi-cooked, and both for domestic and imported products. And most of the pathogens that affect food are associated with with the pathogens of animal origin, and in fruits coming through fecal matter and fecal matter situation. So this is where now we come to building up on aspect of looking at the hygiene and cold chain process. Many hazards are attributed to food originate in the failure to respect hygiene rules in the place at production, i.e. in the field, in the parking line, during storage and transport. And these rules then, which are applicable to food industry, are also very valid in primary production. By primary production, I'm talking about the overall, the agriculture bit. And a large portion of our fruits and some vegetables are eaten raw. And therefore, hygiene is an essential requirement for the conformity of these products. Each type of food product is associated with different types of risks due to their nature. If we compare the various elements, if it is from grains, or if you're looking at vegetables, if you're looking at meat products, each type of food is associated with different type of risk. Meat products highly like chicken is very highly likely to be affected by salmonella and E. coli. We have vegetable products that are associated with various kinds of contamination. And as mentioned earlier, we have three key contaminants: the physical, microbial, and chemical contaminants. And then again, it's also looking at the production, the mode of production. I mean, if the overall feedings, if you're within the animal sector, what is the feeding program? How are they? What kind of feeds are the feeds contaminated? If you are in the vegetable arena, what is the area in which food is being produced? It has various issues been taken into account with regards to the location, to the site of production and the like. And then also preservation mode. How is food preserved? Milk products, they tend to go bad very quickly. And how is that preserved? Fish tend to equally be very highly perishable. So this aspect would be able to address the aspect of hygiene issues. And then we also come to look at the mode of preparation and consumption. Is it raw or is it cooked? It is thus important for the producer to be fully aware of the characteristics of the products and the processes in order to evaluate the risks that are associated with it. So prevention essentially means respecting good agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, and applying good hygiene measures during the harvest and packaging. And this is where now we come into to try and unpackage what we talked about hygiene. What is hygiene? Hygiene refers to the measures and conditions necessary to control hazards and ensure fitness for human consumption of a foodstuff, taking into account its intended use. I think I will repeat that. I'll repeat that. Hygiene refers to the measures. Measures are processes, procedures, and conditions, the environment that are necessary to control. What is control? The management of hazards and ensure fitness for human consumption of the foods that take into account its intended use. So it comprises of food safety and food suitability. That's now in the space of food hygiene. And then who is responsible for food hygiene? Definitely that starts at the very bottom of the pyramid, at the farm level. Food safety begins at production, at the farm level. Applying effective hygiene rules reduces the risk of food poisoning for consumers, and even not just food poisoning, but even other relevant contaminants for consumers. Producers are the first point that need to apply the required food hygiene rules. Hygiene rules also concern exporters, wholesalers, transporters, distributors, and so on. And in general, any operator along the food chain. So when you look back to the graph that you show from farm to fork, all those points are pretty clear on managing food hygiene. In the end, the consumer is also responsible for ensuring that food remains edible and does not present any danger of food poisoning by handling and storing it in a suitably hygienic conditions. So these are the overall elements. Now, when we start talking about hygiene, what are the basic hygiene principles? Hygiene measures apply at every link in the chain and concern all operators involved in the process, from the field to the consumer. Concerning physical, chemical, and microbiological contamination of fruits and vegetables and any other food, preventive measures are always preferable to corrective measures. You only correct when there is already some there's issues that have been heightened. But preventive measures, it means managing risk and eliminating the potential areas of introduction of risk. An effective food safety management system must include a monitoring and a control program covering the entire food production process. Go to the next slide, please. The good hygiene practices of employees and sanitary practices at production sites are also essential factors in preventing contamination of food. And you will bear with me because I'm pretty much aligned on fresh fruits and vegetables because I've been in that space for a very long time. But that does not mean that when we're just discussing on fresh fruits and vegetables, we are eliminating the risks from any other food that we consume. All of this equally applies to the meat products, whichever food that you consume. Good hygiene practices of employees and sanitary practices at production sites are essential factors in preventing, and again we go and say, in preventing contamination on the food that you consume. And then depending on its source and quality, water is also one of those very key contaminants. Depending on the source, what are the key sources of water? We have surface water, that is river, lakes, we have borehole water, we have all various sources of water. Now, depending on the source, the ones that are more exposed to the elements tend to have higher levels of contaminants, be it the microbial or be it chemical contaminants. They tend to have higher. So, depending on its source, the quality of water can contaminate fresh produce, can contaminate foods accordingly. We can go to the next slide, please. So where chemical risks are concerned, observance of good agricultural practices and correct use of inputs such as fertilizers, the crop protection products are guarantees of compliance with the standards. Now, the correct use, those are, when you're talking about the correct use, observing the correct use of various chemical products, herein lies the issues that such as the correct dosage rates of chemical crop protection products or the fertilizers that are used, which are directly used in the for either nutrition or for the crop protection products. Now, we were talking about hazards and we had identified 3 types of hazards, and now we are coming closely, digging deeper into this kind of hazards. We start with the microbial hazards. What are the kind of hazards are we talking about, and what are their sources? Microbial hazards would come from manure, from water, from people, staff, personnel, Why would we talk about people? People are a key source of, depending on their personal hygiene. We are very big carriers of, depending on hygiene. If a person is sick and is working in a food production site, then definitely that there is room that a person is able to transmit the pathogens in the food. There's decaying matter and equally parasites. And what are the risks that are involved? We are looking at risks like E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Listeria, Clostridium, Pseudomonas, the choleras of this world, the typhoids of this world, the dysenteries of this world. They all are microbial risks, anthrax, and the like. They're all risks that we have. And the reasons for that is that they come through fecal contamination. Most of it is through fecal contamination, whether from animal or from human. So if we observe poor personal hygiene during handling, then we are effective carriers of pathogens. Within the chemical arena, what are the key chemicals that we look at? We have already talked about the crop protection products. What as a carrier of chemicals? We have our lubricants, because in the nature of various farming operations, we might ever have machinery involved in the production process. And heavy metals either from production site or through fertilizers. And the risks there, we have exceedances in terms of what we call residue levels. There is an international standard that I've sent on what is called the maximum residue levels for chemicals that are introduced into food. So when food is taken through an assessment, a lab analysis, then they are able to isolate whichever chemicals that have been used. And there's limits that are set to which now a particular product cannot, if it exceeds, then that is considered as it has gone through the MRL exceedance. There's also usage of residues from non-approved products. There are products that either been withdrawn for use or banned. Products like DDT or dieldrin, aldrin, which have long been banned for use in crop production. Yet, if we may still find residues of this product, oils and lubricants, and I've said earlier, heavy metals. And again, the reasons that we have chemical contamination is if you look at that column, forget, I think that was a mistypo, but they're transmitted through overdosage of crop protection product, not observing the harvest intervals, and the poor usage or maintenance of machineries in the farming operation. Then we go to the next slide on the physical attributes, where we have elements such as soil, water, equipment, containers, and workers. These are things that we can see with our physical eye, and we can touch and we can feel. As I mentioned earlier, probably for those of us who eat rice, once in a while you get to bite through you can bite through some stone or that has been in the soil. Those are some, or the cases in Australia in 2018, where there was a contamination on needles in strawberries, and which was done primarily as a sabotage measure. So this the risks that are there is you find this physical element in the presence of finished product. If we say we are selling, we are preparing products, and I think for some of you who are in catering industry, you are usually informed to cover your hair and the like. So in some foods, you go to a restaurant and you can find hair in the food. Those are the kind of physical attributes that you're looking at: the stones, soils, metal, wood, glass. In fact, some things like glass are very controlled. Glass and plastics, knives, plasters. In preparation for food, if people are exposed to injuries or wounds, they tend to cover that with their plasters. And in certain times, sometimes plasters may fall off, and you will find it in food. Pieces of clothing, hair, nails, and beauty products, such as lipsticks, Q-Tex. You may find them in food products. And the reasons are you find either in harvested crop unclean packaging materials, dirty field equipment or product handling equipment, discarded rubbish bottles, so management of rubbish, inappropriate working clothes, or necessary lack of appropriate working clothes, which is called the protective, the personal protective equipment, and untrained staff who are untrained on personal hygiene. You may find staff that are probably going into a production site with materials that are not allowed within that. So the general hygiene principles in Codex for both production chain and packing condition, the general principles dictated by Codex primarily concern the production conditions. These are part within the Codex is the global standard that basically now has been embraced internationally. And so I will not talk about, there are many other standards like the technical barriers to trade and other standards, but probably we'll go through the Codex, which now then says hygiene measures related to production conditions, healthy operating premises, and a packing station. Those are, there has to be a healthy operating premises and a packing station. Measures for personnel hygiene, the health status of the personnel, their personal cleanliness, the clothing, and access to facilities, washing facilities or toilet facilities. In any food processing area, whether from production site to the food handling site, there must be measures for toilets, that hygienic toilets that workers have to have access to. Hygiene measures related to facilities, that is the cleanliness of equipment and apparatus. What the equipment that you use, the apparatus that are used, they have to be the standard of cleanliness, and also storage materials, sorting devices, and grading devices. And then you have aspects related to handling, transport and storage, and control of operations, control of operations, where we are looking at raw material and the water quality, things that are definitely the standard that we look at. And then aspects related to maintenance, cleanliness, and waste management. Those are within the defines of the general hygiene principle from there. Now, foodborne illnesses can cause more than just a stomach ache. They cause death. In a nutshell, foodborne illnesses they go to the level of causing death. We can move to the next slide. So some of the recommendations that we're looking at, we will try to address them one by one. We're looking at now cleanliness, and the key part of the body that is in contact with most of the products that we're handling is called the hand. Now, either we have to operate with clean hands or protected hands. So from clean hands, which have contact to surfaces and to food. Now, hands, to manage our hand hygiene, there is two ways. We can either wash our hands, or we wear protective. We can wear gloves, which would be used then to manage the hygiene status of the hand. So we need to be, why do we wash our hands? We need to wash our hands after going to the toilet, because there our hands, we are in touch with the fecal matter. After handling pets or other animals, when after sneezing or sneezing, coughing, or touching some body parts which have wounds, and before handling food. This is where we need to wash hands up. And the 8 principles herein would be followed through some of the things that you're looking at in good agricultural practice that would be able now to manage the overall control. Number 1 would be prevention of contamination, and looking at starting a program for managing good agricultural practice and handling and management of human and fecal matters, and worker hygiene and sanitation, and follow applicable laws. And the key thing in it all is having a system of trace back, of managing product where we know the origin of the product or the source of the product, and then how it moves through the chain. And this also is enhanced through a documentation process and a record keeping process. You can go to the next slide. So some of the principles within the good agricultural practices here we are trying to address from the codex practices is preventing microbial contamination is favored by relying on corrective action once contamination occurs. Now within those aspects now enhancing it's enhancing our ability to the ability to practice a system of management through and having corrective measures. So this ensures that we are minimizing we are minimizing contamination and enhancing food safety in fresh produce using a practice of management system that is encompassed through what we call the good agricultural practice. As we mentioned earlier, good agricultural practice also tries to address water. Water comes into contact with the produce, either when it is irrigating or through washing. That's so the quality of water and so minimizing the potential for microbial contamination or also chemical and physical contamination from water is used within the food is important. The other one is the usage of animal manure. I think we all farm in our primary production. There's a lot of farming through using manure or solid waste. And this should be managed closely and minimized for potential microbial contamination of produce. So we've had terms of well composted. So it has to be well composted in order to eliminate. And there's the procedures to ensure that this it's well composted. And then we also talked about the aspect of hygiene and sanitation practices during production, harvesting, sorting, packing, transport to minimize overall. So within those chain, all the various actors have to follow through the respective hygiene and sanitation practices. And the key thing is that we have to follow all applicable local government and corresponding laws and regulations and standards. Good agricultural practices ensure that all local laws that have been set aside for handling of food, the regulations of public health, the regulations of hygiene safety, the regulations on food handlers that have been put in place, which would be then used now within and standards that have been set aside to ensure that happens. Good agricultural practices also ensures that there is accountability at all levels. Accounting at farm level, at packing level, at the distribution level, at transport level. There is accountability and transparency that are key elements to identify any potential introduction of contaminants. So still, as we said earlier, record keeping and documentation is very, very key. And therefore, this encompasses the entire list, the entirety of what we consider as traceability and traceback. Now, the critical practices that will help to avoid or reduce cost on this, especially is to ensure that we have to ensure that documentation. We have to ensure that it is recorded and it is recorded and it is recorded. That's primary. Anything that is done, any practice that has been put through must be recorded in order to ensure that there is traceability. Water needs to be tested regularly, and all work areas must be kept clean and tidy. Workers need to be trained regularly on hygiene and sanitation practices. Temperatures, especially if we are now handling beyond just aspect of on storage, then the temperatures must be recorded regularly. And sanitation, sanitizing, washing tools and containers that have access or that have that are in contact with food, they must be washed and sanitized after the production and before they are used. And then use all well composted manure. And animals, for those who are in production sector, animals must be kept out of the production areas. I believe those we've run quite a bit fast due to, I think I just wanted to have this in order to bring to the fore the overall elements on a bias. But when you start looking at the entirety of it, from the food production to the fork, there are quite a significant load of material and on conducting this through risk assessment, through designing a system, and I believe this is just more or less a food safety awareness prior to now going into the details of various standards that exist. We have standards that exist within the food supply chain, such as HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point, ISO 22000, which is which forms now what we call a food safety management system. We have British Retail Consortium for those who have are dealing with products that are in a food handling process. Then we have the farm assurance schemes such as Global Gap and the like that would be used now to manage respective risk and manage various aspects of standards and regulations accordingly. I believe then that encompasses everything. But for now, I would just say food safety begins from the farm. Asanteni sana. Mercy, over to you now.
Thank you, Apollo. Thank you for your insightful discussion. And yes, food safety is quite paramount and quite important. And everybody has a role to play along the value chain. At this point, I'm going to invite the participant to ask questions. And I'm going to read out some of the questions that have been asked and some of which that came out during the registration. That asks, how do you avoid raw material to be contaminated with yeast and molds? And what are some of the corrective measures to take in this case?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The yeast and molds are as a result of what we call post-harvest management. With poor post-harvest management, depending on if we are harvesting, you look at say maize or grain. If harvested during wet conditions, the chances of introduction of these pathogens is very high. If we are storing products like fresh produce in temperatures that are probably in facilities that are warm, then the possibility of having yeast and mold into produce is very high. So there's the aspect of storage, there's the aspect of the timing of the harvest and the conditions during harvesting. So if product is harvested while wet, the chances of and storing it, the chances of having this yeast and molds are very high. If product is harvested like maize is harvesting during the normal conditions and then it is dried properly, then it's unlikely that you'll get that. The second bit is now the storage. For fresh produce, there are certain standards that have been set aside in the storage of fresh produce or any other product. So we have to understand what works for your situation. For grains, for milk, for meat products, for each of these have standards that have been set in which for vegetables, for example, they're stored at temperatures, certain vegetables between 5 to 8 degrees. Other meat products are like between 0 and 2 degrees. Milk is stored at 0 to 2 degrees. Now, all those are the kind of parameters that you need to address individually for each product. And the corrective actions will be taken on that storage aspect and also additionally on the post-harvest management, the conditions during which product was harvested and how it is presented into the storage unit. Mind you, remember, we are talking about the chain from farm through to the distribution, storage, and retail, and finally to the ultimate consumer. Now, during that process, we have to observe proper hygiene rules and also proper proper, what we call the good practices across the chain, whether it is good agricultural practices, good distribution practices, good manufacturing practices, all that along the chain. Thank you. I hope I've tried to answer that.
Thank you, Apollo. There's another question from Evans that asks, what are the hygiene measures to take when you're sharing a van to transport food and also for other transportation? And he also asks, how can you store ripe tomatoes? How long can you store ripe tomatoes and for how long?
I think when we're looking at hygiene measures, it is we have to look at the overall hygiene principles again. There's a staff, there's the hygiene of the van, there's the hygiene of the material that is in place, the overall hygiene principles. How are the food handlers? What is the overall status of that van or that transport facility that is in use? And just that handling process. Do we have sufficiently empowered or competent persons that have the ability to understand the basic hygiene principles? So we just go back to our basic hygiene principles in which we are going to present or we are going to transport to transport food, even when you are sharing a van. I think I would have to do an assessment on the van prior to introducing my material into it. The second bit is how long can I store ripe tomatoes? I believe that is it basically depends on what facilities you have access to, whether you have access to cold storage or not. If you do not have access to cold storage, then ripe tomatoes will not last you very long. I think at most there are certain varieties that would go up to maybe 10, 14 days on the what you call ambient. But if it is within a controlled environment like a fridge, that can go up to 30 days. That depends. It is all defined within the standard for storing tomatoes. One of the critical things that we have to understand is that I think within the respective countries that you're operating, if you're in Kenya, there's a standard for within the that has been released under the Kenya Bureau of Standards that highlights that. So if depending on the area of jurisdiction, I believe there is the requisite bureaus of standards or bureau entities of the quality infrastructure that has been put in place that are set the parameters and the standards for individual products and how it is handled. So you can visit some of those, and then you'll be able to be well informed. I'm seeing some question from Limo Magani again. In this case, goods are already infected. Is there any sort of treatment? If goods are infected, if you already have mold, the food is already contaminated, and therefore, whatever is contaminated is not fit for human consumption. So as we say, prevent. It's difficult to now, if you already have food that has aflatoxin, the only thing, you remember the government, I think the government of Kenya did one thing, they had to dispose of maize that was contaminated and ensure that it was kept away, it could not be accessed by any living form apart from probably the bacteria and anything. So the only thing that you can do to contaminated food is to destroy it. I don't think we can prepare it again and it cannot be fit for human consumption. I'm seeing from Esther Bodu is ISO 22 obtained. There's a standards organization which is called the International Standards Organization. So ISO 22000 standard can be obtained from the website of the International Standards Organization. So if you Google the ISO 22000 standards, you'll be able to get that, Esther. I think I've attempted to answer some of those questions, Mercy.
Yes, we have one last question and it's around, we'd like to find out how to prevent weevils in Moringa and some dried powdered products, and also how to deal with it if it happens in already packed products.
Now, weevils, those are pests that come in, and that is, again, is a storage thing. So there is, within good agricultural product systems, we have pest control measures. Yeah, already packed products. Again, I'll go back to the same case. Already packed products that already has weevils. I'm assuming if you are a consumer and I'm selling you a pack of products that has weevils, I don't think you'll purchase it. Therefore, if it is already infected, the best you can do is that is basically disposal, because it already has it's already been contaminated. But there's preventive measures that are used to on pests like weevils, like rodents. So you have companies that do that, like Rentokill, who would do what is called fumigation on your storage site. I'm sure we will come in because of issues of storage, and this is a long-term storage. Therefore, prior to storage, this has to be, you have to fumigate your site. So consult, if you are operating in a certain pest control company that would have the approved products that are used now to fumigate the facility against vermin and against and also have rodent control products that then would be able to do the monitoring for the pest and as well as elimination of the pest. But on storage, this is where we are talking about control, corrective and control. Corrective, prevention is better than control. And that was one of the simplest messages that we got even way back as we were growing up, that to prevent is better than to cure. So we have to ensure that we have this requisite prevention. If I know I'm handling a product that is susceptible to weevil attack, then the critical thing is to take up the measures to prevent weevils, and that way you are eliminating the hazard from hitting your product.
You can connect with the speaker, Mr. Apollo, through his email address at chairman@fpic.org, and his contact number projected on the screen. You can also interact with Invest in Africa through our social media, and our contacts is projected in the feedback slide that is being projected. At this point, I'd like to thank you for joining us in the masterclass today. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that we have learned and we have been able to capture one and two things to improve in your enterprise and in your agribusiness value chain practices towards providing safe food to each and every consumer that we feed in our country and in our continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.